The call came on a Tuesday evening, while I was reviewing blueprints for our latest sustainable housing project. My mother's name flashing across my phone screen felt like a ghost materializing in my office. I hadn't seen it there in 7 years. My name is Harper, and the last time I spoke to my mother, she told me I was throwing away generations of family legacy by choosing to become an engineer instead of a doctor. "You're dead to me," she'd said, her voice as cold as the surgical steel she wielded daily. I let the phone ring 4 times before answering. "Hello? Harper." My mother's voice wavered, something I'd never heard before. "I need your help." The irony wasn't lost on me. Dr. Julia Meyer, the woman who built the largest private healthcare network in 3 states, was asking for help from her disowned daughter, the engineer she'd dismissed as a disappointment. "Mom, it's been 7 years," I said, pushing away the blueprints. "Why now?" "The business. It's in trouble. Structural issues with the new medical center. Financial problems. The board is threatening to remove me." She paused. "I know what you do now. Your firm's reputation—" "Stop!" I cut her off, memories flooding back. The dinner where I'd announced my decision to switch majors from pre-med to engineering. The look of disgust on her face when I explained my passion for sustainable architecture. The way she'd cleared my childhood bedroom of every trace of me the day after graduation. "You made your choice clear back then," I continued. "Why should I help you now?" "Because despite everything, you're still my daughter." Her voice cracked. "And because I know you're the only one who can fix this." I glanced at the photo on my desk, me and Cameron at our firm's opening day. We'd built something remarkable together, proving everyone wrong, including my mother. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Send me the details." After hanging up, I called Cameron immediately. He answered on the first ring, probably still at his desk despite the late hour. "You'll never believe who just called," I said. "That hot barista from downstairs finally asked you out?" "My mother." Silence on the line. Cameron knew everything. He'd been there through the worst of it, offering me a place to stay when my mother cut me off financially during senior year. What did she want? Her empire's crumbling, structural issues, financial problems. She needs our help. "Harper," Cameron's voice turned serious, "this could be huge for us. Meyer Healthcare is a massive potential client, but are you sure you want to go down this road?" I walked to my office window, looking out at the city skyline we'd helped shape. "You know what's funny? All those years ago, she said engineering was beneath our family's dignity. Now she needs an engineer to save everything she's built. Karma's a bitch," Cameron chuckled. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking—" I paused, watching a construction crane swing in the distance. "I'm thinking it's time to show my mother exactly what her disappointment of a daughter can do. Harper, not just for revenge," I clarified, "but to prove a point. To create something meaningful from all this bad blood." "Send me whatever she sends you," Cameron said. "We'll look it over together tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat in my darkening office, remembering the little girl who used to build elaborate structures with blocks while her mother prepared for surgery. The teenager who dreamed of bridges and buildings while being dragged to medical conferences. The young woman who finally found the courage to choose her own path, even at the cost of her family. My phone buzzed, an email from my mother with attachments. Financial reports, structural assessments, board meeting minutes. 7 years of silence, and now here was her legacy, laid bare in my inbox. I opened the first document, and as I read, a plan began forming in my mind. My mother had always taught me that precision was everything in medicine. One wrong move could be catastrophic. She never realized those same principles applied to engineering, to business, to life itself. Now I had the chance to show her, not just to save her company, but to reshape it into something that would bridge our worlds, something that would force her to acknowledge the value of the path she'd once condemned. I picked up my phone again and typed a quick message to my mother. "I'll meet you tomorrow. 9 a.m., my office." Then I added the address of the sustainable high-rise we'd designed last year, the one that had won us national recognition. It was time to start building something new from the ruins of our relationship. Whether that would be a bridge or a wall remained to be seen. I arrived at the office early the next morning to find Cameron already there, surrounded by spreadsheets and structural reports. His tie was loose, coffee cups littering his desk, signs he'd been here for hours. "This is worse than we thought," he said without looking up. "Your mother's company is hemorrhaging money. The new medical center's foundation is compromised, and they've been covering it up for months." "How bad?" "Without intervention? 6 months before total collapse, both structural and financial." I sank into the chair across from him. "She built that company from nothing. 25 years of work." "Don't," Cameron warned. "Don't start feeling sorry for her. Not after everything." The door opened and Malik strode in, tablet in hand. Our financial analyst looked like he hadn't slept either. "You need to see this," he said, pulling up a series of graphs. "The company's been shifting funds around to hide the extent of the damage. Classic shell game." "My mother would never," I started. "Your mother might not know," Malik interrupted. "Look at these signatures. Someone on her board has been orchestrating this." I was studying the documents when my assistant knocked. "Dr. Meyer is here." My mother walked in exactly as I remembered her. Perfectly pressed suit, not a hair out of place. But there were new lines around her eyes, a slight tremor in her usually steady surgeon's hands. "Harper." She glanced around my office, gaze lingering on the awards on the wall. "This is impressive." "Malik, could you walk us through what you found?" I asked, ignoring her attempt at a compliment. For the next 30 minutes, Malik laid out the devastating truth. My mother's face grew paler with each revelation. "This is impossible," she whispered. "I review all major decisions." "Apparently not," I said. "Someone's been playing you for months, and now you need an engineer to fix it." Her shoulders stiffened at my tone. "If you're going to gloat—" "I'm not gloating. I'm stating facts. You need our help, and we're willing to give it. But there are conditions." Cameron slid a folder across the table. My mother opened it, scanning the proposal we'd stayed up half the night preparing. "A merger?" she asked, voice sharp. "You want to absorb my company into your firm?" "A partnership," I corrected. "We stabilize the medical center, restructure the finances, and create something new. A healthcare network that combines cutting-edge medical care with sustainable architecture and engineering." "And this?" She pointed to the last page. "A scholarship program? For students pursuing both medical and engineering degrees, funded by the merged company's profits." I leaned forward. "Think about it, Mom. How many other brilliant kids are out there torn between these two worlds? Why should they have to choose?" She closed the folder. "You're asking me to give up control of everything I've built. I'm asking you to save it by letting it evolve. To admit that maybe, just maybe, there's value in both of our paths." The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken words. "I need time to review this," she finally said. "You have until Friday," Malik interjected. "After that, we can't guarantee we can stop the collapse." After she left, Cameron put a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" "No," I admitted, "but I will be. Did you see her face when she realized someone on her board betrayed her?" "Karma's still a bitch," he smiled. "But Harper, are you sure about this merger? It's not just business. It's personal. Really personal." "That's exactly why it has to be me," I said. "Nobody else knows both worlds like I do. Nobody else has as much to prove. Or to lose." My phone buzzed, a text from my friend Alyssa. "Lunch? You look like you need to talk." An hour later, I was picking at a salad while Alyssa listened to the whole story. "So let me get this straight," she said. "You're going to save your mother's company, force her to acknowledge your career choice, and create opportunities for future students to avoid your pain. That's not revenge, Harper. That's justice." "Is there a difference?" "Yeah, revenge destroys. Justice builds something better from the wreckage." She stole one of my tomatoes. "Just be careful. Your mother's not the only one who could get hurt here." Back at the office, Malik was waiting with more news. "We found something interesting about one of the board members," he said. "You're going to want to see this." I looked at the document in his hands and felt my stomach drop. Maybe karma wasn't finished with my mother yet, or with me. The document Malik handed me revealed that Dr. Thomas, my mother's most trusted board member, had been secretly meeting with rival healthcare companies. Not just meetings, he'd been actively sabotaging the structural repairs, ensuring they'd fail inspection. He's forcing a crisis, Malik explained. When everything collapses, he'll swoop in with a lowball offer to save the company. I grabbed my phone, dialing my mother's number before common sense could stop me. We need to meet. Now. Bring your lawyer. 2 hours later, my mother sat across from me again, this time with Herbert, her silver-haired attorney of 20 years, beside her. Show them, I told Malik. As he presented the evidence, I watched my mother's face. The slight tremor in her hands became visible shaking. Herbert's usual calm demeanor cracked. That bastard, my mother whispered. I trusted him. I made him godfather to my... She stopped, looking at me for the first time with something close to vulnerability. To you. Dr. Thomas was there the night you disowned me, I said, keeping my voice steady. He supported your decision, said it would toughen me up. Herbert cleared his throat. This evidence is compelling, but we need to move carefully. If we spook him... We don't have time for careful, I interrupted. The structural issues aren't just on paper anymore. I had our team inspect the medical center last night. The foundation is critically compromised. One major tremor, one heavy storm. How long? My mother asked. Days, maybe weeks. We need to start emergency repairs immediately. Which means we need to sign the merger agreement now, Cameron added. Today. My mother stood abruptly, pacing the conference room. You planned this, didn't you? Created this crisis to force my hand? The accusation stung, but I'd expected it. Mom, look at me. Really look at me. Have I ever been the type to risk people's lives for revenge? She stopped pacing. For a moment I saw a flicker of the mother I remembered from childhood, the one who'd taught me that helping others was life's highest calling. No, she admitted quietly. You haven't. Herbert pulled out the merger documents. Julia, if we're going to do this, we need to move fast, but there's something else you should know. He turned to me. The scholarship program Harper's proposing? It would require dismantling the legacy fund. The legacy fund, my mother's pride and joy. Money set aside to ensure the company stayed in the family, following her strict medical tradition. That's right, I said. Because this isn't just about saving your company, Mom. It's about making sure no other kid has to choose between their passion and their family's approval. You're asking me to destroy everything I built for the future. I'm asking you to build something better, my voice rose. Something that combines both our strengths. Why can't you see that? Cameron stepped forward. Dr. Meyer, your daughter isn't just good at what she does. She's brilliant. That sustainable hospital design she created last year, it's revolutionizing patient care, lower energy costs, better healing environments, reduced carbon footprint. I know, my mother said softly. I read the articles. The admission shocked me into silence. You did? Every one of them. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I never stopped following your career, Harper. I just couldn't admit I was wrong. Herbert spread the documents on the table. Time to decide, Julia. Sign now. We can start repairs tonight. Wait. And we might lose everything. My mother picked up the pen, then hesitated. The scholarship program, you'll oversee it personally? Yes, every step. Then I have one condition. She straightened her spine. Name it after your father. He always said you had his builder's heart. I was too stubborn to see he was right. I blinked back unexpected tears. Dad had died when I was 12, but his influence had shaped my love of engineering. Deal, I managed. She signed. As Herbert witnessed the documents, my mother turned to me. This doesn't fix everything between us. I know. But maybe it's a start. Cameron cleared his throat. Hate to break up the moment, but we have work to do. Dr. Thomas is calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Perfect, I said, gathering myself. That's exactly where we'll spring the trap. My mother's eyes narrowed. What are you planning? Justice, I replied, thinking of Alyssa's words. And maybe a little karma, too. The boardroom buzzed with tension as executives filed in for the emergency meeting. Dr. Thomas sat at the head of the table, a vulture in an expensive suit, watching as my mother took her usual seat. Nobody expected me to be there, which is exactly why I waited until everyone was seated before walking in. "What is she doing here?" Dr. Thomas demanded, his practiced smile slipping. "My daughter is here as a consulting engineer," my mother replied smoothly. "Given the structural concerns with the medical center, I thought it prudent." I set my laptop on the table, connecting it to the projector. Cameron and Malik flanked me, both carrying stacks of documents. "Before we begin," Dr. Thomas said, "I have some urgent business to discuss. Our financial situation is exactly what we're here to address," I interrupted, pulling up the first slide. "Let's talk about the systematic sabotage of the medical center's construction." The room erupted in murmurs. Dr. Thomas's face reddened. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." I clicked through slides showing altered inspection reports, fraudulent contracts, and diverted funds. For the past 18 months, someone has been deliberately compromising the structural integrity of our new facility while hiding the evidence in creative bookkeeping. "These accusations are ridiculous," Dr. Thomas sputtered. "Julia, surely you don't believe—" "There's more." Malik stepped forward, distributing documents. Bank records showing meetings with rival healthcare companies. Emails discussing the planned collapse and subsequent takeover. A board member gasped. "Is this real?" "Every word," Herbert said from the doorway. "And the SEC is very interested in discussing it all with Dr. Thomas." Dr. Thomas stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. "This is a setup, Julia, after everything I've done for you." "Like encouraging me to disown my daughter?" My mother's voice could have frozen hell. "Or perhaps you mean embezzling from my company while pretending to be my friend." "You ungrateful—" He lunged toward my mother, but Cameron was faster, stepping between them. 2 security guards entered, followed by a woman in a dark suit who flashed her FBI credentials. "Dr. Thomas, we'd like to ask you some questions about your financial activities." As they led him away, still shouting threats, I turned to the stunned board members. "Now, let's discuss the actual state of the company and our plan moving forward." For the next hour, Cameron and I presented our merger proposal: the sustainable redesign of the medical center, the innovative combination of healthcare and green engineering, the scholarship program. "This is remarkable," one board member said, "but the cost will be offset by the energy savings within 5 years," Malik explained. "Plus, we've already secured preliminary approval for federal green energy grants." "And the structural repairs?" "Can begin tonight," I said. "We have crews standing by, but we need the board's approval for the merger." My mother stood. "I've already signed. The choice is yours. We either evolve and survive, or we collapse under the weight of our own stubbornness." She looked at me. "I've learned that lesson the hard way." The vote was unanimous. Hours later, as construction crews swarmed the medical center, I found my mother watching from her office window. "You knew, didn't you?" she asked. "About Thomas, before I called you." "We had suspicions. Malik noticed irregularities in public records months ago, but we needed proof." "So you waited for me to call you?" "I waited for you to be ready to see the truth. About Thomas. About me. About everything." She turned from the window. "I've been thinking about your father. He used to say that healing comes in many forms. I thought he meant medicine, but—" She gestured to the construction below. "Maybe he meant this too." My phone buzzed, Cameron texting about the first round of structural assessments. "I need to go check the site." "Harper?" she called as I reached the door. "That scholarship program. Your father would be proud of all of it." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and headed down to the construction site. But as I walked through the halls of the hospital my mother had built, past the rooms where countless patients had been healed, I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about healing, not just buildings or businesses, but the broken places in hearts and families too. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Alyssa. "Drinks later?" Heard your trap worked perfectly. I smiled and texted back. Can't. Have to supervise repairs. Rain check? Engineer mode activated, she replied. Go build something amazing. And that's exactly what I intended to do. 3 weeks into the repairs, Alyssa burst into my side office without knocking. Her face was flushed and she clutched her tablet like it contained state secrets. You need to see this, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Remember how I was helping Malik dig through the company's old records? Well, I found something that doesn't add up. She pulled up a series of emails. These are from 6 months before your mother disowned you. Look who Dr. Thomas was talking to. I scanned the messages, my blood running cold. They were discussing the future of the company, specifically the succession plan. Thomas had been pushing my mother to secure the medical legacy long before I'd even announced my switch to engineering. He manipulated her, I whispered. He knew I was thinking about engineering and deliberately... The door burst open again. Cameron rushed in, looking worried. Harper, we've got trouble. The advisory board is calling an emergency meeting. They're questioning the merger. What? Why? Someone's been spreading rumors that we falsified the structural reports to force the deal. They're saying we exaggerated the damage to steal the company. I grabbed my jacket. Who's behind this? 3 guesses, Alyssa said grimly, and the first 2 don't count. Thomas. Even from behind bars, he was still causing problems. When's the meeting? 1 hour. Conference room A. I called my mother while speed walking to my car. Did you hear? I'm already here, she replied. Harper, they're talking about nullifying the merger. Everything we've done, not going to happen, I cut in. Get Herbert there, I'm on my way. The hospital parking lot was chaos. News vans had somehow caught wind of the story. I slipped in through a service entrance, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The conference room was packed. Advisory board members, department heads, and a handful of people I didn't recognize. My mother sat rigid in her chair, Herbert whispering urgently beside her. Before we begin, I announced, striding to the front, I'd like to show you something. I pulled up the live feed from the construction site on the main screen. This is what your foundation looks like right now. Notice the stress fractures? The compromised support beams? This isn't fabricated. It's real-time footage. Footage that could easily be manipulated, someone called out. Then let's go see it in person, I challenged. Right now, I'll give you hard hats and a tour, but first... I nodded to Alyssa, who distributed copies of the emails she'd found. These prove that Dr. Thomas has been orchestrating this situation for years. His goal wasn't just financial gain, it was control. Control of this company, its legacy, and even my mother's personal decisions. The room erupted in overlapping voices. My mother snatched up the emails, her hands shaking as she read. This is outrageous, one board member stood. We can't trust anything coming from you. You're clearly biased. Then trust this, a new voice called from the doorway. An older man in a construction uniform stepped forward. I'm the original site supervisor from the medical center build. Dr. Thomas ordered me to use substandard materials and falsify reports. I have proof. The next hour was a blur of testimonies, documents, and increasingly damning evidence. By the time the dust settled, the advisory board wasn't just approving the merger. They were calling for a complete audit of every project Thomas had overseen. How did you find the supervisor? My mother asked afterward as we watched the news vans finally leave. I didn't. Malik did. He's been building a network of whistleblowers for weeks. She shook her head. All these years I thought I was protecting our legacy. Instead, I let a snake poison everything, including my relationship with my own daughter. Mom, no, let me finish. When you chose engineering, I saw it as a betrayal. But Thomas had been whispering in my ear for months, playing on my fears. I was so worried about preserving tradition that I couldn't see the future right in front of me. A crash from the construction site interrupted us. We rushed to the window, but it was just a minor equipment mishap. Still, it reminded me how much work remained. I need to get back to the repairs, I said. Of course. She hesitated. Harper, would you tell me about what you're doing down there? The technical details? I'd like to understand. For a moment, I was that eager teenager again, trying to share my passion for buildings and bridges with my mother. But this time, she was actually asking to listen. "I'd like that," I said softly. My phone buzzed, Cameron asking about tomorrow's construction schedule. But for once, it could wait. Right now, I had a different kind of building to do. The day everything nearly fell apart started with a phone call from Malik at 5 a.m. "Someone's trying to sell the company," he said without preamble. "A developer named Alejandro just made an offer that's going to be hard for the board to refuse." I was already pulling on clothes. "How? The merger's almost complete." "There's a loophole. If a better offer comes in before the final signing next week, the board has to consider it." 20 minutes later, I stormed into the office to find Cameron and Malik huddled over documents. "Show me," I demanded. "Alejandro's offering 30% more than our merger valuation," Malik explained, "plus guaranteed jobs for all current staff." "It's too perfect," Cameron said. "The timing, the terms, someone's feeding him information." My phone rang. My mother. "Are you seeing this?" she asked. "I'm looking at it now. Mom, this has Thomas written all over it." "Agreed. But Harper, the board, they're already talking about accepting. The offer's just too good." I paced the office, mind racing. "Get everyone together. Emergency meeting in an hour." "Harper." "Trust me, Mom, I have a plan." As soon as she hung up, I turned to Cameron. "Remember that sustainable hospital project in Miami? The one Alejandro tried to poach from us last year?" His eyes widened. "The one where he tried to steal our designs but messed up the calculations?" "Exactly. Malik, pull those files, and get me everything you can on Alejandro's current projects." An hour later, I stood before the board again, but this time I wasn't defensive. I was ready for war. "Before you vote on Alejandro's offer," I began, "let me show you what you're really getting." I clicked through slides showing Alejandro's failed projects, environmental violations, and worker safety issues. Then I pulled up the Miami hospital designs. "These are his current blueprints for a hospital in Phoenix. Notice anything familiar?" The board members leaned forward, studying the designs. "They're your plans," my mother said suddenly, "from our merger proposal. He's stolen them." "With one crucial difference," I continued. "His team copied the designs but didn't understand the engineering. The sustainability systems won't work as he's planned them. The energy costs would bankrupt the facility within 3 years." Herbert stood up. "This is grounds for a lawsuit." "Oh, it gets better," Malik added, distributing more documents. "We found evidence that Alejandro's been working with someone inside this company, someone currently sitting in jail." The room erupted in angry murmurs. "Dr. Thomas," my mother said, "even now he's trying to destroy everything." "But why?" a board member asked. "He's already facing charges." "Revenge," I said simply. "He knows this merger will expose more of his crimes. An outside buyer would bury the evidence to avoid scandal." I walked to the window, looking out at the construction site where crews were installing the new sustainable systems. "You have a choice to make," I continued. "You can take Alejandro's offer, which looks good on paper but will destroy everything this company stands for. Or you can stick with our merger and build something revolutionary." "The money," someone started. "Will come," I turned back to face them. "Our projected earnings, based on the reduced operating costs alone, will exceed Alejandro's offer within 5 years. But more importantly, we'll be creating something meaningful, something that combines the best of medicine and engineering to actually help people." My mother stood. "I vote to reject Alejandro's offer and proceed with the merger as planned." One by one, the board members joined her. When the final vote was tallied, it was unanimous. As the room cleared, Cameron pulled me aside. "That was brilliant. But what if they had voted the other way?" I smiled. "Then we would have gone with Plan B." "Which was?" "I already filed a patent infringement suit against Alejandro this morning. He'll be too busy fighting that to pursue any takeover." My mother overheard and actually laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "You really did learn something from all those medical conferences I dragged you to. Always have a backup plan." "I learned from the best," I admitted. "Speaking of which, want to see the new solar installation? They're starting today." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Lead the way." As we walked to the construction site, I realized something had shifted. The revenge I'd originally planned had transformed into something else, something more like redemption, for both of us. But we weren't finished yet, not by a long shot. The day of the final merger signing dawned bright and clear. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my suit, when Alyssa texted, "Ready for your big revenge finale?" "It's not revenge anymore," I replied. "It's something better." The hospital auditorium was packed. Board members, staff, press, even some patients who'd heard about the changes coming. My mother waited on stage, looking both regal and nervous in her signature blue suit. "Big crowd," Cameron whispered as we took our seats. "You sure about this?" I patted my laptop bag. "Absolutely." Herbert stepped up to the podium first, handling the legal formalities. Then my mother took the microphone. "For 25 years, I've led this hospital with one vision: excellence in medical care. Today, we're expanding that vision." She paused, looking directly at me. "My daughter once tried to tell me that healing comes in many forms. I didn't listen then. I'm listening now." She gestured for me to join her. As I walked up, Malik slipped me a note. "Thomas watching livestream from jail. Enjoy." "The merger we're finalizing today isn't just about saving a building," I began. "It's about reimagining healthcare itself. But before we sign, I have one last announcement." I pulled up my presentation. The first slide showed the scholarship program details, but with a twist I hadn't shared with anyone, not even my mother. "The Thomas Family Medical Scholarship Fund is being renamed," I announced. "From today forward, it will be the Meyer Elliott Innovation Fund, honoring both the medical legacy of my mother and the engineering spirit of my father." Gasps from the audience. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "This fund will support students pursuing dual degrees in medicine and engineering, with a focus on sustainable healthcare design. But there's more." I clicked to the next slide. "We're converting the old East Wing into an innovation lab, where medical students and engineering students will work together to develop new solutions for patient care." The room erupted in applause. I continued, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "And finally, we're establishing a patient support program. Any child who shows aptitude in both medicine and engineering will receive mentoring, regardless of their family's expectations or traditions." I turned to my mother. "Because no one should have to choose between their passion and their family's approval." Tears streamed down her face as she stepped forward. "Harper, Wait," I said softly. "There's one more thing." I nodded to Cameron, who wheeled out a covered easel. When I pulled off the cloth, my mother actually gasped. It was a blueprint, the original sketch my father had drawn 30 years ago, showing his dream for a hospital that combined cutting-edge medicine with innovative design. The sketch my mother had dismissed as impractical back then. "Dad was right," I said, my voice carrying through the silent room. "He saw the future. We're just finally catching up." My mother touched the blueprint with trembling fingers. "I kept this," she whispered. "All these years, I kept it locked in my desk. I couldn't bear to look at it, but I couldn't throw it away either." She turned to the audience. "My husband was a visionary. My daughter is too. I was too proud, too afraid of change, to see it. But today, we honor both their dreams." The signing itself was almost anticlimactic after that. As cameras flashed and people cheered, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Herbert holding his phone. "Thomas just called his lawyer," he said with a grin. "He's apoplectic about the scholarship fund being renamed. Says you can't do that." "Actually, we can," I smiled. "Check the original trust documents. The fund can be renamed by unanimous board vote, which we got this morning. He never thought anyone would dare challenge him on it." Later, as workers began installing the new sign outside the hospital, Meyer Elliott Medical Center, where innovation meets healing, my mother found me watching from the garden. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" she asked. "Not just saving the hospital, but transforming it into what Dad dreamed?" "I planned to get revenge," I admitted. "But somewhere along the way, I realized there was a better option. We could heal more than just buildings." She took my hand, the first time she'd touched me in 7 years. "Your father would be so proud, and Harper, so am I." My phone buzzed. Alyssa again. Revenge level, expert. Healing level, legendary. I smiled and replied, just wait until you see what we build next. Because that's the thing about revenge. Sometimes it builds something better than what it destroys. Sometimes it builds bridges instead of walls. And sometimes, just sometimes, it builds a future no one could have imagined. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings as I stood at the podium, facing the first class of Meyer Elliott Innovation Fund scholars. 20 bright faces looked back at me, each representing a dream that refused to be confined to a single path. Welcome to your first day, I began. Each of you sits here because you dared to challenge the either-or mentality. Medicine or engineering? Why not both? Movement at the back of the room caught my eye. My mother slipping in quietly, taking a seat next to Cameron and Malik. She gave me a small nod, and I continued. When I was your age, I had to choose. It cost me my family for 7 years. I paused, meeting each student's gaze. But today, you don't have to choose. Today, we build something new. After the orientation, a young woman approached me, clutching her acceptance letter. Dr. Meyer, your mother, she was my interviewer. When I told her I wanted to design prosthetics that could help my little sister walk, she cried. Actually cried. Then she approved my scholarship on the spot. I smiled, remembering my mother's call that night. Sarah's project, she'd said. It's exactly what your father would have loved. The memory carried me through the halls of the renovated East Wing, where medical and engineering students now worked side by side. In the innovation lab, my mother was already there, supervising a group working on a new patient monitoring system. Harper, she called out, come look at this design. Something's not quite right with the power distribution. I studied the blueprints spread across the table. The solar backup isn't properly integrated. Here, let me show you. As we worked together, I caught snippets of conversation from the students around us. Did you hear Dr. Thomas got 20 years? Yeah, and they're using his seized assets to fund more scholarships. Karma's wild, right? My mother tensed slightly at Thomas's name, then deliberately relaxed. You know what your father used to say about karma? She asked, surprising me. He said it's just the universe's way of teaching engineering principles. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Dad never said that, I laughed. No, but he should have. She straightened up, suddenly serious. I got a letter from Thomas yesterday. He wanted me to know that he did it all to protect our legacy. What did you do with the letter? She smiled. Recycled it. Some things aren't worth holding on to. She gestured at the bustling lab. This is our legacy now. All of this. Alyssa burst in, excitement radiating from her. Harper, the sustainable designs for the children's wing just got approved for federal funding. Full amount. The news spread through the lab like wildfire, students and staff celebrating. In the midst of it, Cameron appeared at my side. Remember when this was all about revenge? He asked quietly. I watched my mother explaining a complex medical procedure to an engineering student, her hands moving animatedly. Funny how things work out. Speaking of working out, he grinned, wait until you see what Malik found in the old financial records. Turns out Thomas wasn't working alone. There's a whole network of corrupt hospital administrators we can expose. Already plotting the next crusade? Always. But this time we do it right from the start. No revenge, just reform. My mother joined us, eyes bright with purpose. I might know some people who can help with that. Other hospital directors who've suspected similar issues but couldn't prove anything. Look at you, Mom. Turning whistleblower. Well, she smiled, someone taught me that sometimes you have to tear down the old to build something better. The afternoon sun streamed through the Innovation Lab's solar windows, casting everything in a warm glow. Students bent over their projects, medical charts mingled with engineering drawings, and the steady hum of progress filled the air. My phone buzzed, a message from Herbert. Final paperwork filed, Thomas's appeals denied, it's really over. But looking around, I realized it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Every student here represented a future where barriers between disciplines crumbled, where passion didn't have to fight tradition, where healing came in all forms. Harper? My mother touched my arm. Ready for the board meeting? We're reviewing next semester's scholarship applications. Actually, I said. "I thought we could grab coffee first. There's this little place downstairs." "The one your father used to love? With the terrible muffins?" "That's the one." As we walked together, I realized that revenge might have started this journey, but love, for family, for innovation, for possibility, that's what finished it. And really, that's what we were building here. Not just a hospital, not just a school, but a bridge between all the things that matter most. Some people say revenge is best served cold, but sometimes it's best not served at all. Sometimes it's best transformed into something warmer, something healing, something that builds a future worth sharing.